caller that found me. The night the phone found me, rain fingered the brick, and the building smelled faintly of yeast and old paper. I had been awake for hours, tracing the invisible seams of my apartment, the hairline crack above the sink, the spot on the ceiling that never quite matched the paint. At 2 a.m., the screen flashed. No number, only an odd, patient pulse. Caller unknown. I answered because curiosity has a gravity of its own, and because the apartment had grown too quiet to bear alone. The voice on the line did not waste time with names. It described the coffee mug in my sink with a familiarity that made my skin raise. The chip on its rim, the tea stain along the inside, the tiny scratch down the handle. I laughed once, a short, awkward sound, and the voice, soft, patient, waited like someone measuring a delay. "You left the window slightly ajar," it said, as if reciting a fact. I closed the window, feeling observed by a map I hadn't drawn. At first, I believed coincidence. Old buildings store histories, and the mind fills blanks with guesses. But the calls multiplied different hours, similar calm, and each observation inched inward. The voice knew where I kept the mismatched socks, the exact time the radiator clicked when it woke. When it mentioned a Polaroid tucked behind my stack of magazines, my pulse tripped. I didn't remember taking that photo. Yet when I reached, my fingers closed around curled paper and a dark shape at the edge of the frame. Leela knocked 3 nights later, Flower still dusting her apron, and carried a light you'd expect from someone who sells warmth for a living. She leaned in the doorway and listened to my story like a baker tastes dough, skeptical, searching for where it might fail. "Neighbors borrow and forget," she said, offering a foil of ordinary explanation. But the next time the voice named Leela's habit, the way she left her key on the hook by the stove when she was tired, my doubt felt thinner, like paper wetted at its edge. I began to test it. I moved a single spoon to a different drawer and waited. The caller noticed 3 calls later with the kind of casualness that made my chest tight. "You like your spoons aligned with the handle to the left," it said, as if pronouncing taste rather than fact. Sometimes it asked questions that felt like rehearsed doors. "Do you prefer the window open when it rains? Do you sleep with the hallway light on?" Each question sounded harmless, until I found I had been aligning my life to answer them without thinking. The voice never demanded. It offered details and watched how I moved around them. Once it paused and said, "There is a photograph next to your bed you're not ready to look at." I pretended not to hear. Later, curiosity and something sharper drew me toward the bedside table, and the Polaroid there showed the hallway outside my door, taken from some angle that could only have been close. A sliver of a figure crouched by the stairwell, just a suggestion of shoulder and outline, like a memory that had been washed and left behind. I started recording the calls on my phone out of a desperate need to hold something concrete. The voice memo files filled with clean sentences, and the hush between them, breaths that were too measured to be casual. When I listened back, I realized the silences held their own cadence, and more than once I could make out a faint second voice, a ripple beneath the words, as if the line itself was layered with echoes. The recordings became small, disgruntled maps, I rewound and rewound, trying to find a landmark. One afternoon, the caller said, "You should meet your neighbor in the stairwell." I told Leela what the voice had said and watched her expression cool from easy patience to a walled caution. Still, curiosity nudged us both into the stairwell, a short, spiral descent of concrete and iron. At the bottom, the corridor smelled of bleach and rain. We found, pinned to a door opposite ours, a Polaroid identical to the one in my hand, same shadow, same corner curl. Someone had been photographing the building like a catalog of small betrayals. After that, sleep thinned into checklists. I jotted where I left things, locked doors twice out of superstition, and studied my neighbors in glimpses. Everyone seemed uninterested in the extraordinary. People kept their ordinary lives close like blankets. Yet the corridor felt like a patient thing. A throat cleared around me, and the calls grew more intimate. Once, the voice described a bruise on my knuckle I hadn't noticed, and the small, private way I had flinched while opening a jar. It knew the inside of my smallness. I considered moving. Packing felt like betrayal, an admission that the building could take me in its pocket and shake. Besides, the caller's knowledge made leaving both tempting and impossible. Maybe the voice would follow. The calls shifted then, from observational to conversational. It began to ask about memories in the way a friend might tease. "Do you remember the smell of your grandmother's kitchen?" I answered in fragments, then withheld others, sensing that anything I volunteered might be rearranged for use later. The night I found the key, everything condensed. I had been below boiling with the sense that someone had been near my door at odd hours. Leela, oddly quiet, handed me a single brass key she found in the stairwell's lost and found tray. "It wasn't mine," she said, fingers tight on the ring. The key had worn teeth and a bend like it had seen stubborn locks. When the caller heard me cradle it against my palm, it hummed. "You have something that belongs to more than one door," it said. And for the first time, I felt as if the building itself had a throat and had just swallowed. I tried to meet the caller once. I set a time, a quiet ritual, the apartment dim, my recorder on, all doors checked. The phone rang, and the voice arrived like a wind through a tunnel, precise and softer than my memory of it. I asked where it was. It replied with the sort of answer that was both literal and absurd. Between the second and third floor, leaning into the stairs' shadow, where the emergency paint chips off the wall. I went to the stairwell, breathing uneven, and the shadow was only a shadow. But the paint flaked beneath my nails like proof. After that, the calls softened into a kind of companionship that felt both intimate and invasive. The caller stopped cataloging things and started speaking the odd truths of someone learning the contours of another's days. It told me about the way people pass under streetlights, how the neighbor downstairs hummed along to radio static, about the way my breath hit the glass when I was thinking too loud. It never told me who it was, only that it was there when I needed, an impossible reassurance that read like a threat in the wrong punctuation. The ending I learned to expect never came. There was no final reveal, no sudden confrontation. One morning, the call stopped, as if the line itself had decided to breathe elsewhere. I listened for the pause and found instead a rock-solid absence. I played the recordings until the voices thin and repeats became a litany. Sometimes, in the late scrape of pipes, I imagined a shape hurrying past my door. Other nights, I caught myself laughing at the idea of being found. The building returned to its ordinary hum, but the Polaroids remained, and the key sat on my table like a challenge. Weeks later, I found a single new photograph slipped under my door, a corridor shot, taken low to the ground, a different angle than the others. In it, the silhouette at the edge of the frame seemed closer, less a suggestion and more an intention. There was no message attached. I held the photo up to the light, and for a moment imagined the phone buzzing again with that calm voice. Whether the caller had vanished or only watched me learn to live with its absence, I could not tell. I put the photograph into a drawer labeled "Things I Don't Want to Know" and walked into the hall with my key in my pocket, feeling how easily a building could rearrange belief.